Welcome back to Monster in My Closet, the podcast where we shine a light on the professional world's darker corners. I'm Anil Saxena, joined by my co-host, the founder of Medusas, Morgan Hunter. Each episode, we tackle the fears and faux pas that haunt our work lives, with insights, interviews, and a dash of humor, some stupid analogies, and probably swearing. So if you've ever felt like you're navigating a workplace labyrinth, a never-ending approval process, an evil hall of mirrors, or a constantly ending quarter, you're in the right place. Let's confront those monsters together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Monster in My Closet. So Morgan, this week, are we scared or scary?
We're scared.
We're scared. We're scared. We're scared, and we're making bad decisions because of it.
Yes, for sure.
Yes. So this week, we are calling this episode, The Grim Reaper of Resilience. So in this very episode, we explore the shadows of personal resilience at work, uncovering how to fend off the bitter sting of failure and emerge stronger. Learn the rituals to shield yourself from the invisible terrors of fear, anger, and regret that undermine your confidence and success. So 3 big things we want to talk about today. First, we want to talk about macro resiliency and micro resiliency. So comparing post-event recovery strategies with instantaneous resilience during unexpected challenges. Second, we want to talk about common distractions that inhibit work performance, exploring how anger, fear, and regret impact focus and performance in the office, but they do make for funny SNL skits, so we do want to keep that out there. And then finally, we want to look at steps to improve micro-resiliency at work, practical steps to enhance mental preparedness and high focus in a high-paced business environment. Morgan, what's the rationale here for why we felt like this was a topic we wanted to explore?
Yeah, back in the day, during my first midlife crisis, I decided that I wanted to race cars, so I did. And a reason, just thought I needed to do that. And I learned a ton about myself in doing that. I discovered every weakness I had as a human being learning to race cars. It was in your face. And the thing that I felt like was one of the best lessons that I learned was if you screw up a corner on a road course, which is a course that has left and right hand turns, right? It's not an oval. You're actually going to be turning. If you screw up a corner and you get upset about it, because time is measured in seconds, you're upset for even a couple of seconds, you're going into the next corner upset and still ruminating on the previous corner, and therefore you screw up the next corner, and then the next corner, and then the next corner, and then your lap is screwed up, right? So I got really frustrated about this, and I asked my instructor, I'm like, what the hell? This is very frustrating. And he's like, don't get upset. I'm like, what? Excuse me? It's like, look, you just make note of what happened. That didn't go right. It'll still be there when you're done with the race, right? Just make a note and focus on the next corner. That's it. You just packed it and you're on to the next corner instantaneously. So it taught me to make notes as opposed to like swimming in it, like swimming in the failure. I was like, that didn't go as planned. Next corner, right? So I did find that I could start pulling that over into the business world, and I felt like it really did improve the way I showed up at work. So that's why I wanted to talk about this.
Yeah, and I love this topic too, because I think we live in such a fast-paced organizational thing nowadays that it's so hard to dwell in what didn't go well. I think that there's all kinds of great examples. I know for me, like I wrestled, and my coach, Mr. Rossetti, would always say, like, if you miss that thing, you'll get to do it again, or you won't, right? Like if you dwell in the fact that you missed that double leg takedown, you're going to lose.
Yeah, you're
And
screwed
yeah,
from the second you start thinking about it. Yeah.
yeah. And, actors have this where you're on stage and you forget a line or you forget a cue. And what are you going to like take the whole play down with you because something happened like that? So this notion of micro resiliency is really important, and it actually helps to keep you a little more sane in the day to day world. But what's the difference between the notion of macro resiliency and micro resiliency?
Well, I think that the macro is something you do after something has happened and you've had like the come down. So, for instance, at the end of my race, then I would go and I would sit down and I'd analyze every single corner and I'd look for opportunities to improve, and then I'd go implement this. Right.
Right.
So that's like large scale, but the micro is the what am I doing at the moment the mistake happens? How am I moving on to the next thing and saving? How do I save the moment? Is that micro resiliency?
That's really really powerful. It's that notion of it's the after effect, right, of what you're analyzing. And I also think it's kind of the larger goal that you're trying to hit, right? We want to impact climate change, right? That's the macro thing that we want to do. But the micro thing is maybe like we don't use the Ziploc bag on a regular basis. So
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of similar. So, what are some of the things that you can do to start to recover from those little issues that happen? And particularly, I'm thinking about at work, right? You get an email, you're in a meeting, somebody cuts you off. What are some of the things that you think about?
Those are some interesting examples. Come back to the email because my answer will be different on the email thing. But I think for the most part, having grow resiliency at work for me comes in the form of being prepared. So the best example I can give is when I was very young in my career, I had to do this big presentation for a C-level executive. And I worked on months doing research and pulling all this data together. And I was feeling like this is very important and you need to hear what I have to say, executive, because I'm bringing you important information. So listen. So that was me with my serious face on going into this meeting. It was a 30-minute meeting. And the senior executive was 20 minutes late and said, I have 10 minutes. And I'm like, well, this is very important. I am not going to be able to cover this in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, do the best you can because I'm leaving in 10 minutes. I was so jacked up in my head. I was like, I don't understand. This guy broke all the rules. He came in late. He's like, this very important topic needs details, and he just wants a summary. My God. So he, at the end, because I couldn't explain myself to him, he says, go back and rerun all the analysis.
Wow.
I cried. Not there. I mean, I cried later, but I was like, what happened? What happened? And for a while, I was like, that guy's such a jerk. That guy's such a jerk. That guy's such a jerk. And then I'm like, but really, I probably could have handled that better. So let's unpack that, right? So now, the advice that I give to everyone in the world, anytime you're meeting with a senior executive, you have 3 versions of your presentation, right?
Yeah.
You have the full version of the presentation. You have the 10-minute version of the presentation. And then you have the 2-minute version of your presentation. Like if you can only say one thing to this executive, what is the thing you're going to say? So now it's informing everything that I built since then and always being prepared for them to not have the bandwidth for me to do the whole show for them. And that has really been beneficial for me.
Yeah, that is so powerful. Like that notion of being prepared and having the time to get prepared so that you know what you're going to talk about inside and out, so that at any point you can kind of switch gears, pull things from the end of your presentation to the beginning, or any of those kinds of things is monumentally important. I mean, I know, like, when I used to lead big training events, people would have questions. And when I first started doing it, it'd be like, well, we're going to talk about that in 30 minutes. I lost them because they're like, I want to know now. And so it's important that you're able to flex. I think that, and then the other thing to me is that you have rituals that you allow yourself time before and after,
Yes.
right? To, like, kind of mentally prepare and mentally kind of decompress afterwards. There's this book that is called Micro Resiliency, and one of the authors is Bonnie St. John. She was an Olympic skier, right? She did slalom or something, downhill
Yeah.
skiing thing that she did. And she, right? And
Yeah.
but she talks about that notion of really having islands in the stream, right? Which is a song that I now have in my head. And for those of you that don't have it in your head, you should Google it, because it is mind candy. But you have these islands in the stream where you can kind of set aside moments where you're doing things to recover and prepare. And it's like email. There's this
Mhm.
notion that, oh, you should set aside an hour every day to answer your email. Well, that's completely unrealistic in many organizations. And so you need to have little pockets where you can lean into things so that it doesn't distract you, and you don't get triggered by anger or fear or regret, right? As you're trying to focus on what's there right in front of you. I think that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, the whole concept of um, the emotions you're bringing to the table do impact you at work, and if you need to be very resilient, let's say you're doing a a big presentation or a speech or a training, or you speaking to 400 people, or you have something you're trying to show to the CEO. I think you need to put aside any strong feelings you may have in the moment. Like, I'm scared of doing this. What if I don't do this? What if they say yes? What if I screw up? Blah, blah, blah. Like, all of those, that churning, you just need to say,
Yep.
you need to take a seat. I'll come back to you later, because right now I'm going to focus. I'm going to do this, and here's how I'm going to handle. If someone asks a question, here's how I'm going to handle it. If the person only has 10 minutes, this is how I'm going to handle it. If they have a strong objection, this is how I'm going to handle it. So you're just going through and scenario playing in your head, and you're like, okay, I've covered most of the scenarios. I'm pretty confident. I'm going in, right? No distractions. So
Yeah.
if you're doing something super important at work, I know this is hard, but don't make a meeting right up against that meeting where you need to show up with your A game. You have, because if you have a jacked up meeting before the important meeting
Yeah.
and you're coming in hot, that's going to impact your ability just inherently to be resilient in that space. But also, you've taken away your ability to kind of reflect on what you're going to say and bring your best game.
Yeah, that whole notion of the Grim Reaper of resilience resonates with me, because you are subject to whatever happens before, right? So all the stuff that it gets compounded as you're kind of going through your day. And it is part of the reason that when, people used to commute to work, I don't know why you would now, because we have computers, but when we used to commute to work, and I'd be going down the Eisenhower in Chicago, and I'd get stuck in traffic, and some jackass would cut out in front of me to get one car length ahead. And it's just like, why the fuck did you do that? Then By the time I got into the office, my first meeting, those people, they were getting whatever I had brought in with me in that traffic ride in. There is a misconception that you can separate that stuff, right? You can, but it takes time to do. And so you have to give yourself the grace to have that kind of pre-event mental preparation that gives you the space to do those things. And so it's really important that you think about how you're going to prepare and what is going to happen. I mean, I know that there was a presentation that I did with some colleagues of mine to get a big piece of business early in my consulting career. They somebody said something about, you know, they when we were going to start our presentation, they said, "Is it just the three of you that are going to be presenting?" Because we were doing this presentation, and before us there was like, big partner, big company, big, right, and they were bringing in their presentation and right, their entourage. They had like 30 people and all this stuff, and it was just the three of us. And um, we sat down, and I said that, yeah, it's just the three of us, but we're the best three consultants that you're ever going to get, and we're the three that are going to lead this for you. I said, and the guy who asked me the question said, "So we're not going to get anybody else that's working with us?" I said, "No, what you see is what you get. And if you don't like what you see, you're going to get that too." And then all of a sudden, the presentation like turned. And I could have said, "Well, what do you mean?" Or I could have said nothing. And just in the back of my mind, had the hamster wheel running about how we're never going to get this presentation, how we're never going to get this project.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that you think about, right, like how you're going to react to things. And we knew we were going to go against a big organization, but we use that as a strength going in. So it's important that you kind of have those little tricks that you're using to make sure that you're prepared for when things happen.
I really like the idea of like thinking about objection handling up front, because they're going to say it, they're going to say it. They're going to want to talk about the elephant in the room, right? So it's best to just lean into those moments, just like you did, right? And say, "Yep, it's us, just three. Here we are." Spin it, make it into a positive, move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I think that's really, really critical. I mean, I do know that there are times where I have kind of lost my shit in the moment. Kind of, right? I am so bad at this because I feel, like I get really protective of the team that I work with and the time that they spend on things. And so at the beginning of this year, there was an email that was sent out about a change in a service level agreement. And one of the folks that I work with brought it to me, and they said, "This happened," and they said they're not going to support it. And I was like, "Wait a minute, that's not right. I'm going to do something about it." And I CC'd everybody, and I sent this email, and I'm like, "That's not right. And you never told us about this." Yeah. And I got like 30 seconds. I got a response like with the email that they had sent me about how this changed. Now, had I taken a millisecond in my pea brain and went and looked at like the context of this conversation, I would have seen that at the bottom of that email thread was that fucking email. But
yes.
I didn't.
Do nothing. That, to me, that is like the best strategy in any like high tension thing. First, do nothing. Orient yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And you want to make sure that you take a breath, create that island in the stream to like, don't respond to the email as soon as you get it or the voicemail or whatever. and make sure that you're getting the context of the situation. And when you make a mistake, because you will, or I do, own it. Like, really own it. Like, I did
Yeah.
that. I'm sorry. You're right. I didn't read that all the way through. I apologize.
I want to talk a little bit about micro resiliency for people who may have disabilities or
Mm,
neurodiversity, because
right.
it looks different. Not gonna lie, right? So for me, in order to have a maximum amount of resiliency in work, it means that I need to be taking care of myself physically and mentally in order to make that happen, right? So if I'm feeling quite ill, my resiliency, like I'm just like, in pain management mode. I have no resiliency. I am managing my own stuff today.
Mm,
So
mm,
it's or if you're on the spectrum or something, like if you've had too much stimulation in a day, and like that last person comes in and pokes the bear, you may not be able to dig deep and find the most appropriate reaction to that. So you kind of have to do the best you can to set up an environment where you have the highest chance possible of having resilient behavior. And I think also it's okay to tell people when you're not doing well. That took me a really long time to learn. It's like, you know what? I'm feeling really sick today. Fill in the blank, whatever information you want to share. If you just want to say I'm under the weather, that's fine. But to just let people know you're under the weather. So they have some expectation that your responses might be different today. I have definitely just hit some mental and physical walls along the way where I could not be resilient. It just wasn't in the cards. I had to just kind of protect myself a little bit and say, here's the situation I'm in, and I'm going to do the best I can not to lose my job today.
But I think what you bring up is really powerful because we work in a very diverse environment, just in general, right? That you have people who come from all kinds of different backgrounds, who have different
Mm-hmm.
requirements in terms of processing time, and in the way that they operate in meetings. And so I think it's really important to get, as a leader, you want to make sure that you're clear about the folks in the kind of in the room, in the virtual room, or on your team, about their needs in terms of how they best respond, how they need to input information, make decisions, those kinds of things, right? Like, that's why it's good, like, have an agenda for a meeting. Make sure that you have outcomes, that you send notes afterwards. All of those kinds of things are really helpful when you're making sure that you're helping someone, right? That is different, or that might be coming from a different meeting or things like that, right? That increases micro resiliency as well. There was when we were doing this research, Morgan, there was some stuff about the anti-fragile mind that I thought was
Mm-hmm.
really, really interesting. There was a book that was written called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, and super, it's just fascinating kind of way of thinking. From why did you think that that was an important concept to kind of include in this conversation, that notion of the anti-fragile?
Yeah, I think that the reason that I wanted to include it is there's kind of a process, a mental process you go through where you go, okay, I experienced this adversity. What did I do to contribute to that problem, if anything? What can I learn from it? What did that teach you about who you want to be? How did it make you stronger, and how you shift from being a victim to a victor in the future?
Yeah.
So for me, um, looking at setbacks as a learning opportunity. I mean, I've had some pretty messed up things happen to me, and the first words out of my mouth is, what can I learn from this? And it's kind of to remind me that that's the headspace I need to be in. I need to be in the curious headspace. What can I learn from this?
Mm,
What can I do to make my life different? based on this horrible thing that's happened. And then obviously the accountability if you played any part of in the setback. But looking at failures as learning opportunities, no matter how small they are, right? Make a note of it, right?
Yeah.
You're making a note that didn't work out. You go back and go, okay, what can I learn from this?
Yeah.
So it's that learning cycle that I think that the anti-fragile mind is why I wanted to include that.
I love that concept. And it is that notion of putting yourself like in the position to learn from and potentially be in the midst of failure, right? So it's like exposing yourself to those stressors and uncertainty and risk, and becoming more resilient because of it, right? Because you kind of know what to expect. Had you never had the experience of that senior leader that you did a presentation for saying you have 10 minutes, you would have never learned from that and never been in the position where you learned you had to prepare in a different way. I think it is so important in the world of work that we live in today that you hone yourself, right? You really hone that ability to learn from those little failures or little trip ups along the way, and the big ones, right? Because that's how you get more effective over time, is by being prepared for those things that you know that are going to come because you've experienced them already. So
I think there's something that we can do as leaders, though, to help our teams with this concept. You know, you have an adult daughter,
yep.
as I did, and so I had very strong feelings about what kind of parent I was going to be. And I think I followed through with it for the most part. But one of the things was that if my daughter fell down, I was not going to rush to help her and panic. That I was going to laugh and pick her up and move on like nothing happened. And to kind of divert like the oopsie, oops, let's go, oops, like on to the next, oops, on to the next. And I feel like we could be better leaders if when our people have failures or setbacks, we go, oops, moving on. You're like, okay, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. We're over here now. We're over here. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. We're over here. And I know that's a strategy for children, but I really feel like we're not very gracious in corporate America when people make mistakes. So I think we can be more gracious as leaders and going, yeah, that didn't work out, but let's move on. We know it happened. We won't let it happen again. Moving on.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful because, the idea that we have to be perfect or that we can't make mistakes, it actually shrinks us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the notion about being anti-fragile. Like, I want to avoid anything that's going to smell like or have the inkling of a mistake. And you do it at the price of being innovative, being different, being more effective. It just limits your ability. And so that whole notion of like, hey, let's help people be more resilient in the moment by not stressing over the mistake that was made, or the slip up, right? I think that's super powerful.
That's
Cool.
awesome.
Yes.
Can we leave our listeners with some best practices on being resilient?
Well, we could, if we had any, but no, not joking. I think to me, there's three big ones that come to mind right away for me. I think one is that you want to think of worst case scenarios as you're preparing for something. So that's one thing. Be prepared, right? Prepare yourself. Make sure you're thinking about worst case scenarios, and make sure that you have some rituals before and after, right? Like, I'm going to have a little break before and I'm going to have a little break after so that I can decompress. And then the last thing is that whole islands in the stream. So I think if you have those in the moment, right? If you're able to have those little breaks in the moment, it helps you with building that resiliency. What would you add to that, Morgan?
I like what you're saying about the worst case scenario, but what I'll say is acknowledge the worst case scenario, but don't let your head get in your head, right? So you're still putting aside the distractors of anger, fear, and regret, right? So you don't want to be fearful. You just want to acknowledge this thing could happen, and I have a plan for that, and like no emotion to it. And that moment of quiet reflection before you're having to do something big where resilience is going to be important, and visualize the outcome rather than all the excruciating detail along the way. Like, this is the outcome I want from this meeting, and as long as I achieve that outcome, I'm good. There may be many paths to that outcome. They're all viable as long as I get to that outcome. So I did never think I would tell people to visualize things, but that's where we are today. You need to visualize.
Right. What is that? Be the thing you want to see or something.
With the ball.
And I think two references or two resources I would recommend. One is that book, Micro Resiliency by Bonnie St. James. And then the other is Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. And if you're not a reader, like, there's tons of videos that they have out there. They're really, really good in being able to teach about how to be anti-fragile and how to have an increased sense of micro resiliency. So cool. Right on. I feel way less scared and I feel better about my life in general. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for listening to another episode of Monster in My Closet, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
As we wrap up another episode here at Monster in My Closet, we want to thank you, our fearless listeners, for joining us on this journey of exploring what scares us or when we're scary. Professionally, of course. Together, we've ventured deep into the workplace wilderness armed with humor, insights, and a touch of irreverence, and hopefully learned something together along the way. But our journey doesn't end here. Monster in My Closet is proud to be part of Medusas.org. Medusas is a membership-driven, non-profit organization serving underrepresented groups, minorities, and individuals with disabilities who are doing business in the software-as-a-service space. We're a community created by SaaS professionals, for SaaS professionals, and even the SaaS curious. Visit Medusas.org to discover how you can contribute to a movement that empowers professionals to face their workplace monsters head-on. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your colleagues, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us shine a light on the monsters lurking in the professional closet, making our community braver, stronger, and a little bit wiser. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo, embrace the journey, and remember, no monster is too big when we face it together. Cheers.